So I want to do a video about functions, and just to give you an overview in more detail about what this video is about, I want to talk about what a function is, what a function is not, and maybe provide some visual examples for being able to quickly determine whether or not something is or is not a function, and then go over a homework problem that you might have to do outside of class. So with that said, let's get started. So what is a function? So a good way to think of a function is kind of like this black box or system, and we feed inputs into these systems, and these inputs are numbers. So in this particular case, let's call it 2. And then assuming that the input is valid, we should get a singular output. So in this case, let's say 3. Now as mathematicians, we want to provide some notation so that we can have good bookkeeping and do a lot of problems using these ideas. So let's cover that. So typically in math, we like to label our inputs as x, and it doesn't really matter the symbol that you choose, but in most textbooks and through most of your academic careers, you've probably already seen x as a labeled input. So we also like to call the black box f, but we could just as easily pick another symbol such as G or H. And then our output we call f of x. So if I were to kind of apply this more general notation towards the example that I just showed you, I would get x is equal to 2. Okay, that goes into the system in question, which we suspect to be a function. And then on the output, we get f of 3. Oh, I'm sorry, that is not correct. F of 2, okay? And that is equal to 3. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and maybe talk about what is not a function. Clear this. So what is not a function? So what is not a function is if I give an input into a system, let's say x is equal to 1, okay, we'll call the system or function in question is f, okay, and we'll say that the output is f of 1, okay, but instead of getting a single output, let's say we get 3 and 4. And in this case, I know immediately that this is not a function because the conditions for defining a function is if you get a single, if you give a single input that's valid and you get an output, you should get a single output. And here there is 2. There's 3 and 4. So that's great. We now understand what is a function, what is not a function. Let's maybe look at some visual tools we can add to our tool belt to quickly determine if something is or is not a function. So over to the left here, I have a table, and you can kind of think of the tables as repeated experiments as inputs to the pictures that I showed previously. So in this case, I could say, x is equal to 1, reading this from the first value in the table, and I can say that it goes through the black box f, and on the output we get f of 1, which happens to be equal to 5. And I can also say, and then I'd do it again. I'd say x is equal to 2, I'd feed it into the system, and then I would get f of 2 on the output, and that reading from the table would be 7. So what I've done is I've taken this table and I've plotted it over to the right, and what we can do is we can actually just do something that's called the vertical line test. And the vertical line test is simply you go to each and every single data point within your graph and you draw this. That's not a great vertical line. There, that's somewhat vertical. If you draw a vertical line through your data point, there should be no other data point that intersects with this vertical line. Okay, so go through every single one of these points. We can clearly see if I can draw a vertical line that each vertical line does not intersect with any does not intersect with 2 data points. It only intersects with 1. So this is indeed in fact a function. So let's look at the next slide. So here we can actually see it's the exact same chart from the last example, with the only exception is that I've added another field, 3, 6, and there was already an input of 3 into the system, and we said it was 4. So what does that look like visually, and when we start to think of the vertical line test? So you can go through each one of these points, draw a vertical line, and then you get over to these data points in red. And if I were to draw a vertical line, which is really hard with a pen tablet, then you could see that this does not pass the vertical line test. I have 2 data points that both intersect this vertical line. So and just to kind of look at the pictures that we've looked at previously, to kind of do a full circle. If I say x is equal to 3 as an input to the system, f, and I get f of 3 out, well, I would get both 4 and 6. So in both cases, we can see that clearly if I give the input x is equal to 3, I'm getting more than a single output. And therefore, this system is not a function. So let's walk through one of your homework problems, just so you have an idea of how to do this yourself when you go to practice. The table shows a function composed of given input and output values. Here's the table. Which sets of values can be included in the function? Okay, so they're saying that this is a function, and I want to add an input to this table such that this remains a function. Okay. And it says select all possible sets of values. So I've taken the liberty of actually plotting this ahead of time. So this table here is exactly as the table here, and this graph is just a plot of these values. So why don't we go through and actually just plot the values of possible candidates to add to the function. So let's do this. So let's look at the value 1, 2. So 1, 2. Okay, I can kind of look at that right off the top of my, just using my eyes, and see that we're passing the vertical line test. So I'm going to say that's an acceptable value. And then there's the value 2, 3. So 2, okay, 3 would be here. Okay, and I can say that, oh, hey, like you're not passing the vertical line test. We already have an input value of 2, and we've already defined it to be 1. So that doesn't work. So we'll say that, hey, that's not a possibility. Okay, and now let's look at the next one, 3, 2. So go to the graph, 3, 2. That would be the point right there. We can see immediately that does not pass the vertical line test, so we'll rule that guy out as a possibility. That's something to be added to the function. And then there's an input of -3, 3. So let me look at the graph, -3, 3. Hey, it looks like we had no other point defined for x is equal to 3. So that looks good. And -4.5. which is somewhere here, 6. Okay, that also passes the vertical line test. There's no other, output defined when x is equal to -4.5. So this is also an acceptable input. So hopefully, after doing all that, you have a good intuition for what a function is, what a function is not, and the tools at your disposal for to figuring out whether or not data from a table is indeed, in fact, or not a function. Thanks.